No, I'm just pumped. Like, I'm excited. I feel nervous and excited and anxious, and feel like it's just been, an idea. And a lot of times, I feel like an idea that came from like where there's no answer for, like no solution. And just some of the gaps that I have personally experienced as like a speaker, as an attendee, as a speaker, as an exhibitor. I've been on all the sides of the conferences in our industry, and there's some really good ones. And then there's sort of this trend where I feel like a lot of our clients who are trying to like sort and sift and seek out like what information to get, they don't know where to go, or they go see the same get the same content, same curriculum, especially on the business side. And one of the big challenges is that it's as clinical providers and owners, you tend to see them take preference for the clinical, stuff, like instead of and missing some of the business tracks. So if there sometimes could be a cadaver course, and then, I didn't get to learn that. So I think what I see are just so many times like the entrepreneur, the business owner is going to the clinical and then sending like practice manager to the business. And there's so much to be learned through an experience where they're investing in not only learning the business stuff, but like the leadership and being around other women who are going through the same things. I think that we tend to see more lectures and like, your 20-minute, which I understand as a conference organizer, you're like trying to get as much in as possible, and you don't want people to fall asleep because most speakers aren't really that dynamic. We don't know, right? Like until you learn how to be. But I have realized, even just like having been, a couple years at Aesthetic Next as an example, and like given talks, but then also had the opportunity to give workshops, and what like an hour and a half is like being in the room together where you're hearing real lived experiences and people are asking questions, and then somebody can say, oh, I'm dealing with that too, or here's how I, here are some best practices, here's how I handle that situation. And I think the biggest thing, like the biggest gap for me, is that you go sit in a room and you see someone on stage, and number one, you don't know if it's a sales pitch because it's like, what's the motive for speaking? Or maybe it's just a really great conversation, but they're talking at you, or it's them talking about their successes. And here's how I got to the peak where I am, right? And as someone who's sitting in the audience, you're like, okay, this is what I need to do to get to there. And the reality is we know, like working with women so intimately on a day-to-day basis, the growth happens in the failures. It's not in like the achievement of the thing. It's like when I felt, when that employee left, when I made that bad decision, when I made a bad investment, when I thought this was gonna happen a certain way and it didn't. And that's when our heads spin around, and the growth is like, hey, how do I grow from this and overcome the situation so that I can show up into that same adversity again through a different lens, as a different woman. And there's so many success stories that we get to have exposure to every single day working with our clients that the world doesn't get because they're not, being endorsed to be on a stage. And so I wanted to create that stage for them, and it's a stage that's built around an authentic message of vulnerability, of like, hey, this was like my biggest fear, I experienced it, and I was able to get through it by doing this. I think it's going to be a different dynamic when everybody has a conversation in the room like that. Yeah, it sort of started where we had our academy retreat even like last year, and everybody was sitting around like the fire pit, like we should have our own conference, and a lot of people say that. And I think it was more of just like, I'm tired of the same old stuff, like let's all learn from each other. But then for me, I wouldn't say selfishly, more unselfishly, I felt like, well, let's do this not just for the academy, like let's bring this to the industry. And quite honestly, I would love to bring this beyond our industry, right? Like I think that the thought leadership that these women bring to the table transcend just aesthetics and wellness. They're just building multi-million-dollar empires, like, as just gritty founders. And like what that is something so incredible. so they're women who are doing the thing, and I think like I kind of built this whole agenda backwards. Normally, you would seek out like the speaker first and then have them talk on their thing. And I actually chose the topics that I believed underpinned the challenges that female entrepreneurs have in our space. And then I'm bringing in people, and in some cases multiple people, who can talk on that one subject because they did that in their business, right? So like, for example, we have Blair, who she was working with an agency, paying multiple six figures a year for them to run like her marketing, and ended up having a complete, she'll share her story, but situation where she had to let them go and then rebuild her entire e-com strategy brick by brick. And she does multi-million dollars a year in e-com, and she's her own contractor, right? And her own agency subcontracting out. And so she can talk about like how do you do that, because she had to build that up from scratch. So stories like that, or how women, we have Jessica, who her biggest fear, and I think a lot of women's biggest fear, is like, you train an employee and they leave. Well, she did, and not only did one leave, but her two top employees left and then started a business down the street. And so she's going to talk about that story and about what she's learned growing her empire, around handling competition. So they're just real lived stories of triumph, really. And I think that conversation, the shift in that narrative, is going to put everyone in the room in a position where they want to feel comfortable to open up and share their stories as well, and not feel like they're in isolation or they're alone. It's very lonely running a business, but they're going to be like, oh, cool, like you got there because you were here, and so it's going to be a really fun, dynamic faculty that is actually sort of like inbred, right? Like there'll be speakers that are like their attendees that they're going to just pop up on stage and talk, and we're going to workshop and have a little bit of a different format, in one room where everyone can just sit and not have to like bring their Dr. Scholl's like blister pads to like get to the next track over. Yeah, I mean, all the speakers like that I've talked to that are coming, have been a lot of women who have been through Voice of Impact and really done the hard work on unraveling their own story, and now being able to share that in a way that resonates and inspires, empowers other women. It's not just about, being dynamo on stage. It's about realizing I have something really important to share. Yeah. And I want to be at a place where I feel confident enough to share it with other people, because I realize that it can help them. And I think that's a lot of like the intrinsic work that these women have done going through Voice of Impact program. And then others just, like, hey, I really want to help. Like, our philosophy is, as the tide rises, the boats rise. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I've had personally as a female entrepreneur is a lot of these girl boss masterminds are like, they're not building companies, like real companies, like sellable businesses, like business assets, and they're not talking about things like private equity and where do we invest and how do I build a business with my husband, because he works for me. Those conversations aren't being had. And that's just because of the percentage of women who actually are doing that. The aesthetic industry is a rarity in that sense. So I think we're in a room with women who are empowering and encouraging each other, but not in a way that's just like 1, 2, 3, rah community. Well, truthfully, because I'm kind of like a lone wolf, you guys know that. But when you're around the right people, that you're in a headspace, people like think like you, that are doing things the right way, like the real way, and dealing with like raw, painful situations, and they're willing to share that, it's different. And these women are gonna like doing deals with each other, I mean, how many women in our academy are going through each other's training programs, and they're paying real money, and working on real collaborations on projects. And I think that's something really special, and that I aim to facilitate through the experience. I do feel like if we're in a position, I'll speak for myself too, like being a speaker on stage, you have to think about so often, like your time, and like how are you monetizing what you're doing, and what's your real reason for standing up there? Like a lot of times it's like, well, I want people to go to my booth, you know, and a lot of speakers are speaking because they're being sponsored by a device company or, you know, a pharma company, you know, to talk about their products. And it's not a bad thing. It's just, we don't always know the motive. And when you have speakers that are there to serve and there to give, it's a different energy flow. You know, I mean, there's nothing worse than like getting excited about a talk title and then walking in and seeing like, you know, Joe Schmo from such and such company standing on stage. You're like, really? You're teaching that topic? Like, come on, you know? And it's like the full sales pitch, and you're like, snooze fest. They are. We have the best clients, but also you know, everything I teach about building an ecosystem that uplifts and supports you. I mean, that's because we're really particular about knowing what we do and how specific of a result that we look to help our clients achieve. So that takes a certain mindset, takes a certain kind of person. And we see all kinds of kinds, but one of the things that it's interesting, like in our discovery calls, we're not selling our programs, we're listening to the other person on the other side of the phone and the way that they talk about their ability to get out of the situation they're in. Are they taking accountability? Do they have a growth mindset? Are they willing to invest and put the work in? Or do they feel like they've just been burned again and again and again? And it makes a difference because we're not selling a TV. It's not a transaction, it's a relationship and a journey that somebody is going on with themselves. And so it's major. They have to be willing to make a transformation and go through an identity shift to become somebody entirely different. There's not been anything in my life that's challenged me in the way that growing and scaling a business has. I don't even know how to describe it, but women who do it know. Like, if you know, you know. It's something so raw. You are faced with like the traumas that you had as a child, and I didn't even have trauma, and I'm finding trauma. So, you know, and it's like, it's insane. Like, where did this come from? Like, how am I thinking this about myself? Why am I responding this way? Why am I so emotional? And you have to like be able to regulate through that. So it's you know, it's not for everyone, but I think that's why we have such amazing clients. I know, I feel like it's like proud mom moment. Yeah. Like it's stuff, conversations that we're having behind closed doors that are like not out there in the public. And to think that we're gonna bring everybody together to like have that conversation. Oh. Yeah, but everyone leaves with like $1 million strategy, right, and like a life-changing confidence to like go out and crush it. Well, our workshops are gonna be like one more practice management focused and one more leadership focused. So like mission, vision, values, and then we're gonna teach like a systems workshop. I know I'll give like a probably opener, and I'm gonna be definitely interviewing and, you know, being a part of the conversation. I've been asked to give a couple different talks, but honestly, I'm boring. Like, I mean, but truly, like, I think the stories that of what we know about these women, and I'm so lucky because I get to interview so many amazing people on my podcast too. Like, having those conversations, like, it's almost like everybody gets to have that and be a part of like those interviews, and then gets to step outside and talk about it. There's going to be plenty of downtime and pool time and cool time and fun time and all of that too. It's not just like everybody's just powering out and like ready to like, when's this thing over? Yeah. But gets to like network and connect. Oh my gosh, this was like, I just knew when it came to like my brain, but I was trying to think of something that like about a thought leadership, because that was really a big focus for me this year, has been how do we develop real thought leaders? Like, this was one thing where, like, when I was working in corporate America, one of my jobs, like with, you know, as a manager, was to develop KOLs. So I would go find kind of like the young up and coming, like great speakers who were getting really good results with like the devices that our company was selling. And I would prep them to get on stage and talk about how great of an experience they had with our company. And I learned a lot about, like, then I knew how sort of manufactured that KOL system was. I mean, it's great for companies, right, to do that. But when I started meeting women that were like, oh, I went through a divorce and my business failed and then I had to start over again. I lost all my money. My husband took my money and then I got going and then I got cancer right? You talk to women like that and then they're like, yeah, and I rebuilt this brick by brick. And now I've got, 2 locations, 10 employees. I run it like this. And I have this proprietary methodology and the story to tell, and you're like, wait, why are you not on stage? Like, how am I not learning about that? And it started to make me think about this sort of dysfunction and the dichotomy between like true thought leadership and KOL speakers. And I'll tell you, when I was selling lasers, like we would all have that back pocket KOL agreement where it's like, okay, well, you want to be a KOL for us, I'll give you 30 grand off of the device that costs us $7,000 to manufacture and you're gonna pay 200,000. But anyway, I'll give you a deal and then you're going to get on stage, you're gonna take phone calls, and that was the transactional exchange of what created a KOL or key opinion leader, and this relationship of industry with people who were put on that pedestal. And so the idea behind Voice of Impact and what we're doing in our academy and what I would like to eventually be known for as somebody who helped bring these voices out to the world and expose them for what they should be. And so I was playing with the whole thought leadership, advisory, and I'm like, but can we make it different? How could it be that but different? And then I put thought leadership advisory TLA on paper and I flipped it. I was like, wait, and I flipped it literally backwards and it was ALT, which to me was like alternative, stood for, and I'm like, wait, this is thought leadership advice, the alternative thought leadership advisory, alt TLA flipped on its head.
I love that.
And I'm like, that's it. It's a place for the rise up of the unconventional thinkers, of the women that are like, we're gonna do it different. And so it's just like, there's the baby. I put the little notes, like I use the notes, app in my phone, and I like have alt, and it's like at the top of every day I'm like popping in there with little ideas and inspo and who's it for, and I started writing like, what one of the things was like, like faith-based like thinkers, like women that are like, they go to church, but then they also say the F word. Like I was like writing like so specific. I'm like this person that's like, I'm like that dynamic, that is like our community. We're like, yeah, let me put on my Sunday best, but don't fuck with me either. I'm excited. Yay. Can't wait. Thank you. It's a big investment and a big risk and, all the things. But I don't care. Like, I just need to be with like all these amazing women in a room in real life, and we need to do it different. We need to like just flip this thing upside down.